Get down and clean them." My son said those words while his wife stood watching, and I froze there in the middle of their kitchen. The shoes on that floor weren't simply dirty. They stood for everything I had given up for the family I had spent my life building. After 30 years of working, providing, and keeping my son safe, I never once thought he would be the one to bring me low. I quietly packed my burgundy suitcase and walked out the door. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't leaving empty-handed. The message, though, is one worth holding on to. There are things a father carries for decades, the weight of sacrifice, the quiet pride of provision, and then one afternoon in a kitchen, he understands that none of it was ever truly seen. That is where this story begins. "Shh, Dad, just do it. Stop making everything so difficult. If you want to stay here, you need to understand your place." My son said that to me, not his wife, my son. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. Before we get into the story, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a quick note in the comments and tell me whether you're listening in the morning with your coffee catching up in the afternoon, or settling in late at night when the house is finally quiet. Whatever time it is, I'm grateful for the company. One small note before we begin: some elements of this story have been shaped for the purpose of telling it well. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. My son, the boy I lifted onto my shoulders at every little league game just so he could see above the heads of strangers. The boy whose entire college tuition I paid by working double shifts for 3 summers running so a loan would never have his name on it. That same boy, 34 years old now, stood in his own kitchen on a Sunday morning in November and ordered his 60-year-old father down onto a tile floor to scrub mud from his wife's shoes. It had begun 20 minutes before. Lacey had come through the garage door on a wave of cold air and perfume, both wrists hung with shopping bags. I was still at the counter on my second cup of coffee, yesterday's green flannel shirt still on my back. A hard frost lay across the yard. She moved through the kitchen without glancing at me and let something fall onto the tile right in front of where I stood, a hard crack like something thrown. Her white limited edition trail runners that came wrapped in tissue paper. She'd had them on that morning at some real estate function, and the soles were streaked with brown mud practically to the laces. "Clean those," she told me. 2 words, eyes elsewhere, the same register you'd use asking someone to empty the bin. My left knee had been unreliable for 2 years, an old work injury that mended badly, but it wouldn't have mattered if both knees were sound. I wasn't going down on that floor, not for her, not like that. "I'm not the help, Lacey," I said. My voice held steadier than I had any right to expect, given how quickly my chest had seized up when those shoes hit the ground. "Do it yourself." Something shifted in her expression. Whatever thin cordiality she maintained around me dissolved all at once, and what remained beneath it was a good deal colder. "You are living in my house for free, Douglas," she said, clipping every syllable. "The absolute least is not that," I answered. She pivoted toward the hallway and said Aaron's name. I heard him coming, before he appeared, feet in socks on hardwood, the familiar sound of the hallway flexing under his weight. He filled the doorway wearing gray sweatpants and an old Indiana Hoosiers t-shirt, hair pressed flat on one side, from the pillow eyes tracking from Lacey to me to the shoes, and then back around again. I knew that look. He'd been calculating like that his whole adult life. Every time I'd hoped the math would come out differently. It never did. "Dad," he said something unfamiliar and hard in his voice now. "Just do it. Stop making everything difficult. If you want to stay here, you need to understand your place." The refrigerator ran. Nothing else made a sound. I held my son's gaze and felt something give way deep inside me, the way a beam gives way, not all at once, but in a final, irrevocable surrender. Not rage. Something that sits further down than rage. The grief that comes from being looked at fully by your own child and judged not worth standing up for. 32 years of shift work. 32 years of pulling into the driveway with torn-up hands and a back that wouldn't straighten. Telling Nancy the sacrifice was justified because Aaron was going to have more than we did. I placed my coffee mug back on the counter. Barely a sound. "I understand," I said. Neither of them caught what I meant by it. I turned for the stairs, one knee grinding with each step. Spine level because I was 60 years old, a man who'd given everything he had to this family, and I was not going to let them see me worse than I already was. Halfway up, a voice reached me and stopped me where I stood. "Grandpa." Nora was in the hall wearing her purple star pajamas, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand by its ear. 7 years old, sleep still in her hair, watching me with eyes that understood too much for her age, carrying a concern that was never meant to be hers. "Did I do something wrong?" The words landed like a missed step in the dark. I bent down, knee protesting sharply, and looked straight at her. "No, baby," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I'd intended. "Not one single thing." She extended the rabbit toward me. "Do you want to hold Clover? He helps when I'm sad." I pressed my mouth shut and held it there a moment. "You hold on to Clover," I told her. "He needs you more than he needs me right now." I went to the guest room and pulled the door closed behind me, put my back flat against it, both palms on the wood, and stood there breathing, longer than was reasonable. The house kept making its sounds around me, Lacey's heels across the kitchen tile, purposeful and precise, each step staking a claim. The television Aaron had switched on down the hall, murmuring at low volume. And further off, Nora's voice light and unhurried, talking to Clover the way she addressed everyone she cared about, as though the exchange was the whole world and she had all the time in it. I let those sounds wash over me and tried to trace back to the moment I'd become a stranger inside them. This hadn't been how it started. That discrepancy kept snagging me, not the ugliness of this morning, but the sheer span between the beginning and now. There had been a stretch that genuinely felt like belonging. I'd inhabited that stretch for nearly 2 weeks, which only made the present reality more difficult to absorb. It had all started on a mid-September evening, with a noise I still can't describe as anything other than a gunshot followed by a waterfall. I'd been at my kitchen counter in Carmel making a grilled cheese sandwich one of those Tuesday nights that doesn't ask anything of you when the basement made itself known. I reached the shut-off valve quickly enough to spare the floors, but the wall was already lost. The man who came the following morning was a barrel-chested contractor named Hank, who delivered bad news with the same flat composure he probably used to order breakfast. He pressed on the baseboard and offered a single-word mold. Then the full accounting. Complete remediation, new drywall, new insulation, a fresh coat throughout. 6 weeks at best, more likely 8. I stood there in my own basement, running numbers that wouldn't resolve into anything reassuring. Aaron called before I had the chance to call him. He'd read my text about the water and already had his answer lined up. "Dad, forget the hotel. Come and stay with us. We've got the space." He delivered it as though the matter were settled, which looking back it already was, only not by me. "Nora mentions you constantly. Lacey just finished redoing the guest room. Come on, let us take care of you for once." That phrase stayed with me. Let us take care of you for once. I kept turning it in my hands while I got my things together. 60 years old, and I'd spent 3 years alone in that house since Nancy died. The silence had shaped itself around me the way an old coat does present, without demanding attention. Neither comfort nor burden, just familiar. The prospect of a full house again, of hearing Nora in the mornings, of brewing coffee for more than myself, I gave myself permission to want it. I should have been more careful about which words in that sentence I was actually reaching for. I pulled out the burgundy suitcase. Nancy's the one that had made every trip with us over 22 years of marriage. The left wheel dragged the zipper caught at one corner every time, and there was a faded coffee stain on the lining from a road trip to St. Louis she brought up for months afterward. I hadn't touched it since the week we buried her. When I pulled the zipper open that night, the scent of her soap came up so fast and so whole that I had to lower myself to the edge of the bed and keep both hands pressed to my knees until my breathing evened out. "Here we go, Nan," I said to the room. Those first 2 weeks passed without incident. Nora was waiting at the door on the first evening, holding a drawing of a horse that bore a striking resemblance to a large dog, which I told her was extraordinary. Saturday mornings, we made pancakes together while Aaron worked through the newspaper. Lacey was agreeable in the absent way of someone tolerating a house guest, not bothered, not particularly engaged. I lay in a beige room on beige carpet each night and reminded myself that neutral was not the same as hostile. The third week, the atmosphere began to change. A section of gutter over the garage had come loose. Lacey brought it up at the dinner table on a Tuesday evening, her eyes on her plate, the way a person raises a problem when the one who can fix it is already seated across from them. I handled it the next morning, before anyone said another word. After that, it kept coming. Bathroom grout one week, a broken garage door, spring the next. Then Nora's school run, twice weekly because Lacey had properties to show, and Aaron couldn't pull himself out of back-to-back meetings. Taken one at a time, none of it was unreasonable. I kept telling myself exactly that: reasonable, useful, short term. But the moment that sits clearest in my mind is a Thursday evening, somewhere around week 5. Lacey had brought a pair of colleagues home from her real estate office, both of them the sort of women whose appearance announces that getting ready took serious time. One of them glanced over at the dinner plates still spread across the coffee table. "Oh, don't bother," Lacey said with a flick of her wrist. "Doug loves keeping busy." Both women turned to look at me. One of them gave me the kind of smile you give a dog who's just performed a trick on command. I returned it. I gathered the plates and carried them to the sink. I stood there feeding them into the dishwasher while the two of them picked the conversation back up. Their voices floating through the archway, rising and dipping, filling every corner of the room that wasn't mine. My teeth were pressed together, hard enough to ache. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd had a great deal of practice telling myself exactly that. Somewhere around week 7, I learned that Lacey had been describing me as the live-in handyman at her open houses. Nora was the one who told me over a bowl of cereal one morning, with the pure guilelessness of a child, passing along something she'd overheard, but couldn't quite make sense of. She offered it up like it was a mildly amusing fact. Then Nora scrunched her brow and looked back down at her breakfast. "Yeah," I said, "I caught wind of that." I set my mug on the drying rack and headed off to deal with the dripping faucet Lacey had flagged on a post-it note left on my door. Leaning there at the threshold of the guest room, I finally let myself see what I'd been too careful to look at directly. This house held no peace to maintain. Whatever quiet existed, I'd been manufacturing it on my own. There's a specific kind of worn out that sleep doesn't touch. By week 8, I knew it the way you know an old injury, the exhaustion of turning each word over in your mind before letting it out of, clocking the mood of a room, the second you stepped through the door, of shrinking yourself down so there'd be more space for everyone else's comfort. 32 years on a factory floor had taught me to keep moving through physical pain. This was a different labor entirely, and in some ways the heavier one. The Sunday it all gave way had opened like any other. I was awake before the rest of the house, the way I always am. A lifetime of early shifts doesn't let go easily. And by 7:15 the coffee was done and the kitchen was in order. Nora shuffled in around 7:30, wearing her purple star pajamas, pulled herself up onto the counter stool, and launched into a story about a book she'd been reading, something about horses, while I stirred together a bowl of oatmeal with maple syrup the way she always wanted it. Those quiet mornings with Nora were the one thing in that house I looked forward to without reservation. She carried Nancy's eyes, that calm, attentive gaze that made whoever she was looking at feel worth paying attention to. Aaron appeared around 8, filled his mug without much ceremony, and retreated to the living room and his phone. I didn't mind. It was what it was. I had long since given up waiting on Aaron to be talkative before 9. Lacey was the surprise. She came in through the garage at 8:40, still buttoned into her coat, dragging a gust of November air in behind her. She'd been at some real estate function earlier, an open house out at a new development on the east side, and whatever she'd expected from it, the look on her face said it hadn't delivered. Everything about her was closed off, jaw-tight, eyes dull. She had 3 shopping bags bunched in one hand, and in the other, she was carrying her sneakers. They were white limited edition trail runners that came wrapped in tissue paper, the sort you saw positioned in magazine layouts, the sort whose box alone cost more than my first car payment. She'd picked them up 2 weeks prior and put them on exactly twice. I knew the first part because I'd watched her wear them. I knew the second because I'd overheard her on the phone informing someone they were limited edition and impossible to source anywhere else. At this particular moment, they were also caked in brown mud, both soles and up along the sides of the toe. Apparently, the development had no paved walkways between the model homes, and the frost from overnight had softened into a muddy slick. Lacey crossed to the kitchen counter, dropped her bags on it without acknowledging me, and then let the sneakers fall to the tile directly in front of my feet. Not to one side, not somewhere nearby, right in front of me. The way you set something down in front of equipment built to handle it. "Clean those," she said, already working one arm out of her coat, her eyes elsewhere. I looked at the shoes sitting there on the floor. I looked at the mud. I looked at my left knee, which had been sending up a steady complaint since 6 that morning. Cold weather had a way of finding it, and something moved inside my chest. Not a snap, not any kind of explosion. More like the slow give of an old floorboard that's been carrying weight just a little longer than it was built to hold. "I'm not cleaning your shoes, Lacey," I said. She went still, then turned her head toward me in the measured way of someone who thinks they may have misheard. "Excuse me, you heard me." I kept my voice even, and it took something out of me to do it. "I'm living here as a guest. I'll pitch in where it makes sense, but cleaning your shoes isn't something I'm going to do. That's not what I'm here for." Something behind her eyes switched off the way a thermostat goes quiet when it's made its decision. "You don't pay a dime to be here," she said, each syllable clipped and deliberate. "Our food goes in your stomach. Our power runs your lights. You occupy a room in our house. The very least you could do." 2 months, I said. 2 months I've been patching your gutters and picking up your daughter from school and repainting that bathroom. Not one word of complaint. This is the line. She held my gaze chin up. "Aaron." She threw his name across the house like something thrown hard at a wall. "Aaron, I need you in here." The sofa groaned. Footsteps. Aaron materialized in the doorway with his coffee mug still in hand, and his eyes went straight to the shoes, then to Lacey, then to me. I could see him working it out. It was written on his face, the same internal arithmetic I'd watched him run through again and again over the past 8 weeks. He always ended up in the same place. Dad. He put his mug down on the counter. "Come on, just clean the shoes." "She's not asking that much." Aaron said, a new edge sharpening his voice, one I didn't know how to place. "You're staying here. You're not contributing financially. Helping out when you're asked, that's the least of it." What moved through me in that moment was so precise and so acute that I had to lock my jaw to keep my face neutral. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. It was the sensation of being looked at completely without any softening by your own son, and being judged not worth a single word in your corner. "All right then," I said, keeping my voice quiet. "I think that tells me everything I need to know about where I fit here." I walked to the stairs. My knee registered every step. I could hear Lacey behind me, her voice dropping into something satisfied, as she said something to Aaron, and Aaron answering. But I kept moving and didn't look back. Nora's door was shut when I reached the top. From the other side came the murmur of her voice talking to Chester the frog. I went into the guest room. Nancy's photograph sat on the dresser where I had put it. The burgundy suitcase was in the closet. I looked at it, and something in me settled into a decision. The thing still held her scent. 3 years on, and I still can't fully account for that. Nancy had left in the spring of her 61st year, a Tuesday morning in April, dogwoods just beginning to open outside the hospital window, and I'd slipped out for coffee and walked back into a room that no longer held her in it, the way a room shifts when the person who animated it is gone. I'd carried the burgundy Samsonite home from the hospital that same day and placed it at the back of the closet without opening it again. But when I worked it down from the shelf and drew the zipper, it caught near the left corner the way it always had. What came up out of that bag struck me, somewhere below thought, her soap, the hand lotion she'd used all those years. And beneath those two things, something that wasn't either of them, something that was simply Nancy, the lived-in warmth of a woman whose mornings I'd shared for 30 years. My legs nearly gave out, and it had nothing to do with the knee. I sat down heavily on the edge of the guest bed, the open suitcase held in both hands across my lap, and I pressed my mouth shut so hard I stopped feeling my lips. My eyes were burning. I was not going to cry in this beige room in this house. I was 60 years old, and I had held myself together through a funeral and an empty house, and 3 years of learning to make coffee for one. I was not going to come apart now. "You okay, Nan?" I said out loud, my voice splitting down the middle like old timber. "Help me out here." The room didn't answer. It never did. But I sat there another minute anyway, breathing through it until the sting behind my eyes faded and my hands went steady and I could think again. Then I started packing. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, my blood pressure medication from the nightstand drawer, the orange pill bottle with my name typed across the label in the pharmacy's neat font, Douglas J. Kenyon, my toothbrush, the paperback thriller I'd been reading in 20-minute increments before bed each night and lifted last. And most carefully from the top of the dresser, Nancy's photograph, the one of her in the backyard squinting into the sun. I was not leaving that behind in Lacey's guest room. I tucked the photo between 2 folded shirts, closed the suitcase zipper, catching again at the left corner, same as always, and lifted it off the bed. The bad wheel scraped against the carpet as I dragged it toward the door. I had my hand on the knob when I stopped because I could hear them downstairs. Lacey's voice high and carrying, describing something to Aaron in the satisfied tone of a person who has just won an argument. Erin's voice beneath hers lower agreeing. The clink of dishes. The television turned up. The sounds of a Sunday afternoon, in a house where nothing had happened, where nobody had said anything wrong, where I was the problem that had excused itself. My jaw tightened until it ached. I turned the knob and opened the door. The hallway was dim, the afternoon light thin and gray through the window at the far end. I lifted the suitcase to keep the bad wheel from rattling on the hardwood and started toward the stairs. I was 3 steps from the top when Nora's bedroom door flew open. She stood in the doorway in her purple star pajamas, Chester the Frog's terrarium visible on the shelf behind her, her hair wild from what looked like an impromptu nap. She looked at me. She looked at the suitcase. Her small face moved through several expressions in rapid succession, confusion, recognition, something that landed very close to panic. "Grandpa!" Her voice was small. "Where are you going?" My chest cracked open all over again. I set the suitcase down. Getting down to her level meant bending my left knee, which sent a bolt of pain straight up into my hip. But I did it anyway because she was 7 years old, and she deserved for me to look her in the eye. "Hey, bug," I said. My voice came out rough, and I didn't try to smooth it. "I'm going to go stay somewhere else for a little while." Her brow furrowed so hard it made her look 40 years older. "Why grown-up stuff?" "Nothing you need to worry about," I said. "Did I do something wrong?" The question came out in a rush, the way children say the thing they've been most afraid to say. Her lower lids were filling up, going glassy and bright. The pain that moved through me then was something I didn't have a name for. It was bigger than grief and sharper than anger, and it settled in the center of my chest like a coal going cold. "No," I said firmly, and I placed both hands on her small shoulders so she would hear me all the way through. "Nora, look at me. You did not do one single thing wrong. Not one. Do you understand me?" She nodded, but her chin was trembling. "Are you coming back?" she whispered. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I'll see you soon," I said. "I promise you that." She launched herself at me, both arms around my neck, face pressed into my shoulder, and I wrapped my arms around her small, warm body and held on. My knee was screaming. I didn't move. After a moment, she pulled back and looked at me very seriously the way she did. When she was about to say something, she'd thought through carefully. "You can take Clover," she said, "if you want." She held out the stuffed rabbit. Its left ear was bent from years of being carried exactly this way. I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. "You keep Clover," I managed. "He belongs here with you. I'll be okay." She didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded again and let me go. I picked up the suitcase. I walked down the stairs. Erin appeared in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, shoulders tense, watching me cross the entryway without a word. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes went to the suitcase. Something moved across his face that might have been regret or might have been relief, and I found I did not have the heart to try to tell the difference. I walked out the front door into the gray November afternoon. The cold hit me like a wall. I loaded the suitcase into the back of my Honda CR-V, got behind the wheel, and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine off. My knee throbbed, my eyes burned again. Out the windshield, the front door of the house was closed. The curtains in the front window were still. Nobody had come after me. I had known they wouldn't, knowing it hadn't made it easier. I started the engine, put it in reverse, and drove away from my son's house on a Sunday afternoon in November, with a suitcase holding 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, and my dead wife's photograph tucked between them. I drove past 2 hotels before I stopped. The first was a budget inn off the highway exit that had a vacancy sign flickering in the cold, like it couldn't quite commit to the idea. The second was a Holiday Inn Express whose parking lot was half full of semis, and whose lobby visible through the glass doors looked like it smelled like carpet cleaner and defeat. I kept driving. The Marriott Courtyard on Michigan Road had a vacancy. I know because I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes before going inside. Engine running, heat blowing both hands on the steering wheel, staring at the lit-up entrance and telling myself to move. My chest still ached from the stairs. My knee had graduated from a throb to a steady, insistent burn. I was 60 years old, and I was checking into a hotel on a Sunday night because my son had told me to understand my place. I got out of the car. The woman at the front desk was young, mid-20s name tag that said Fiona, and she had the particular skill of hotel front desk workers everywhere, which is to look at a man carrying a burgundy suitcase with one bad wheel at 6:30 on a Sunday evening and asked no questions whatsoever. "Single king?" she said. "That's fine," I said. "Room 316, elevators on your left. Can I help with your bag?" "I've got it," I said. "Thank you, Fiona." Room 316 was on the third floor. Beige carpet, beige walls, a king bed with a white duvet, a desk with a lamp, a window that looked out onto the parking lot, and beyond it, the dark shape of a Target that was closed for the night. I set the suitcase on the luggage rack, unzipped it, zipper catching at the left corner, and took out Nancy's photograph. I set her on the desk beside the lamp. It was something I had done on every work trip I'd taken in the last 20 years of my career. Every hotel room, every conference, every overnight in Dayton or some other city, Nancy, on the desk beside the lamp. So the room felt less like a room, and more like somewhere I was only temporarily away from home. "Well," I said to her photograph, "this is a situation." She went on smiling at the camera, squinting in the backyard sun. I sat on the edge of the bed, took off my shoes, and pressed both thumbs into my left knee until the worst of the burn eased. Then I reached for my phone. 14 missed calls, 4 from Aaron, the timestamps running from 7:15 to 8:40, 3 from Lacey, which surprised me less than it should have, 2 from a number I didn't recognize, 1 from my neighbor back in Carmel, Lyle, who had probably seen my car gone and wanted to know if everything was okay, and 1 text from Aaron sent at 8:47. "Dad, when you're ready to be reasonable, you can come back. You owe Lacey an apology." I read it once, read it again, set the phone face down on the duvet. "You owe Lacey an apology." Those words settled over me like a weight. The heating system clicked to life somewhere above, pushing a low drone through the vent near the window. Headlights from a car swinging into the lot below drew a slow arc across the ceiling. And then, because weeks had passed with me finding one excuse after another, I finally unlocked my banking app. I told myself it was nothing. A quick confirmation that the hotel charge had cleared the sort of thing Nancy used to say. I turned into a ritual, this bedtime audit of every pending transaction. The charge was there, $127 per night, still pending. But below it, something I wasn't looking for, a line item that repeated locked in on the 15th of each month. 200 going out to an account under the name Kenyon Aaron M. I scrolled back. Same figure. The month before. The month before that. Keep going. My thumb moved, and the number kept returning, identical, patient, relentless, reaching further back than I was ready to see. I made myself stop at 21 months. Not because that's where it ended, it didn't, but because somewhere around that count, something shifted in my gut hard enough that I had to lay the phone on the mattress and just breathe. Twice 100 times 21 months. I worked the numbers in my head. Then I worked them again, sure I'd gone wrong somewhere. Then I lay there looking up at a water stain on the ceiling, pale brown, roughly the diameter of a dinner plate, while Lacey's voice from that morning replayed without invitation. "You are living here for free, Douglas." I retrieved the phone and looked at the figure one more time. "Am I?" The words came out of me before I chose them, strange and hollow, in the stillness of the room, my voice thin and taut, the way a wire sounds when it's been stretched past what it was made for. $44, $100. 21 months of outgoing transfers I had never set in motion. Money draining from my account into my son's, with the mechanical indifference of an auto payment month after month. And I had been completely unaware. 8 weeks inside that house, Post-it notes shoved at me, repair lists, the word handyman used about me in front of strangers at open houses, Lacey's shoes waiting on the kitchen floor to be cleaned. All of it happening while $44,000 of my own money quietly moved itself to Aaron's account, as though I'd scheduled it and simply forgotten. My hands had started shaking. I clocked this the way you clock something that's been in front of you for a long time before you finally register it. Not shock, something heavier, the dull weight of recognizing a thing you weren't ready to name. I put the phone down on the nightstand. Across the room, Nancy's photograph sat on the desk where I'd placed it. I stared at it. Then I reached back for the phone and opened my contacts and found Roger Pelham. Roger had been the one looking after my finances for 15 years. 65 years old, drove a Buick, had worn the same style of wire-rimmed glasses for as long as I'd known him, and held as an article of faith that financial matters addressed after dark only get worse. It was 11:03 at night. I dialed anyway. 2 rings and he was there. Douglas, he said, no alarm in it, no grogginess, just the same even steadiness he always brought. Roger, I said I need to sit across from you tomorrow morning. There was a pause, him adjusting, settling somewhere, picking up whatever Roger picks up when he knows the tone of a call has weight to it. 800, he said. My office? I'll make sure there's coffee. I thanked him. I ended the call. I sat a moment with the phone in my palm, that transaction list still visible on the screen, the number still burning quietly behind my eyes. Then, I plugged it into the charger, stretched out on top of the white duvet without pulling back the covers, and let the ceiling stare back at me. Sleep took a long time coming. Roger Pelham's office occupied the third floor of a brick building near Keystone at the Crossing. The space had been furnished with quiet taste sometime around 2002 and hadn't been touched since because Roger himself hadn't changed either. Why would the room, same wire-rimmed glasses, same Buick, pulling into the same garage, same navy cardigan cycling on from September through April like clockwork? He was at the coffee maker when I arrived at 5 minutes to 8 and a mug was in my hand before the door had even latched behind me. You look like you got about 40 minutes, he said. 30, I said. He received this like a data point worth noting, then tilted his head toward the chairs across from his desk. I sat. He sat. I gripped the mug with both hands, let the heat move into my fingers, and told myself to go back to the start and say it plainly. So I did. I laid it all out, the burst pipe in Carmel Aaron's offer of the guest room, the 2 months that followed. Lacey's shoes lined up on the kitchen floor, Aaron's voice delivering the words, "Understand your place." The drive to the Marriott courtyard on Michigan Road. Finding the app, finding the number, which was still lodged somewhere behind my eyes, like a splinter I couldn't reach. Roger sat the way he always sat through difficult conversations, absolutely still pen on the desk and untouched eyes level on mine face, giving away nothing whatsoever. When I finished speaking, he was quiet. Exactly 4 seconds. 15 years had taught me not to fill those 4 seconds. All right, he said at last. First thing I need is to understand how the account was structured. Tell me how Aaron came to have access. So, I explained. 3 years back, the spring before Nancy died, just after her diagnosis, I'd added Aaron as an authorized signer on one of my secondary accounts. Not my main checking, not the investment side. A savings account I'd opened back in the late 90s, back when I still traveled for work and needed someone to cover household expenses in my absence. Simple logic at the time, if I was camped at the hospital for days and a bill came due, Aaron could step in without me needing to break away. That account was sitting at roughly $60,000 when I gave him access. After Nancy was gone and the travel stopped, I simply never went back to look at it. My pension fed my primary accounts. That's where the real activity was. The secondary account just sat dormant the way a drawer sits once you've stopped needing what's inside. Roger lifted his pen. The authorization you gave him, he said. Did you put any limits on what it covered? I told him it was for emergencies. Household things, bills, utilities, anything that needed handling, while I was unreachable. I'd said so in writing. I met his eyes. Roger, I started. I know, he said, and his voice was quiet but not unkind. Pull up the statements for me. 22 minutes. I drank my coffee and kept my eyes on the parking lot below his window and did my level best not to run any more arithmetic in my head. I wasn't entirely successful at that. When he turned the monitor to face me, I brought my chair closer and leaned in. The total at the top of the screen was larger than anything my phone had shown me the night before. My phone had only gone back 21 months. Roger's records went all the way. 48,400, Roger said, across 23 months. Something left my body like I'd absorbed a blow. That's not possible, I said, out before I could catch it, which told me that whatever I thought I'd steeled myself for, I hadn't actually been ready for this number. Roger rotated the monitor back toward himself and moved through the records at a measured pace. The recurring transfer you found $1,100 a month accounts for about $44,000. Beyond that, there are 4 individual withdrawals, separate dates, different sums. He listed them. $800 in March, $1, $200 in June, $3,500 in August, and then one that dropped the floor out from under me. $7,500, Roger said. October. Notation says, home emergency Kenyan residence. I fixed my eyes on the desk between us. The grain of the wood, a faint scratch near one corner. There was no home emergency in October, I said. No, Roger said. I didn't imagine there was. The coffee had gone cold at some point without my noticing. I became aware of it from a distance the way irrelevant details surface when your mind is already fully occupied somewhere else. Nancy had been the one who trusted Aaron with that account. More than that, she'd been the one who proposed it. I can still see her the hospital bed, the IV line in her arm, still organizing things, still making provisions right up to the end. Aaron can help with all of that, she'd told me. Let him help Douglas. And I had. I'd done exactly what she asked. Something clenched in my throat hard and sudden. "We need to get to the bank," I said. "Yes," Roger said. His jacket was already coming off the chair back. "And Douglas, before we walk out, there's one more thing." He stopped there, and the way he stopped made me look up from the desk. While I was going through these statements, I came across a reference to a loan inquiry, a private lender, filed under your name roughly 14 months ago. He watched my face with the careful attention of someone reading very fine print. "Have you applied for any kind of personal loan in the past 2 years?" The question hit the room like something thrown hard from across it. "No," I said. "In my entire life, I have never taken out a personal loan." Roger held my gaze for a beat longer than felt comfortable. Then he reached for his phone. "Then the account is only part of what we're dealing with," he said. "But the bank comes first. 35 minutes at the bank. That was the whole of it. 35 minutes to pull apart something I'd arranged out of love and necessity 3 years before when I was camped in a hospital waiting room with my wife in surgery and my mind trying to hold the practical world together so it wouldn't fall apart the moment I stopped paying attention. The banker assigned to me was a young fellow named Wade Lanyard Employee Badge, the practiced even-keeled manner of someone whose training explicitly covers how to handle hard conversations by pretending they aren't hard. "Authorization for Aaron M. Kenyon has been removed," Wade said. He placed 2 printed sheets on the desk between us. "Effective immediately. Is there anything else you'd like us to review on this account?" I studied the pages without answering right away. My name at the top. An account number I hadn't set eyes on in 2 years. A balance running $48,400 short of where it ought to be. "That'll do it," I told him. I shook Wade's hand, buttoned my coat, and stepped out into November. In the parking garage, I sat behind the wheel for 6 minutes. Engine off, palms pressed flat against my thighs, eyes on the bare concrete directly ahead. Then I dialed Larry Beaumont. Larry and I had put in 11 years together at the consolidated plant on the east side, shoulder to shoulder, before the company restructured and we each walked away with early retirement packages within 6 months of one another. 63 years old, alone since the divorce behind the wheel of a truck that predated the children of most people we'd worked with. His defining quality was a kind of bedrock consistency. The man you got at 8 in the morning was the same man you got at 11 at night, without variation. "Third ring, you eat." Yet he said, bypassing hello entirely, "No. Steak and Shake on Shadeland Avenue, Dayton in an hour." By the time I pulled in, he was already settled into a booth. Coffee in front of him, a second cup across the table waiting. He watched me come through the door the way he always watched me when he could tell something had broken head on, without any theater of sympathy, just a steady, focused kind of presence. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you, Larry. I mean that clinically." He slid the coffee across to me. "Go ahead." So I went ahead. Everything came out. The shoes, Aaron's kitchen, the Marriott, the app. I'd been running on up at my phone, Roger's office, the figure on that monitor, the $700 to $500 that vanished in October, beside a memo notation that explained nothing. Larry didn't interrupt once, which was one of the things I valued most about him. He had this quality of becoming very still when you were speaking, not passive, just genuinely present, so that you felt the words you were putting into the air actually had somewhere to land. When I'd finished, he reached into the napkin dispenser, spread one flat on the table, uncapped a pen from his shirt pocket. "All right," he said. "Let's account for this properly. Walk me through every dollar you've put toward Aaron over the last 5 years, not only the account. Everything." I glanced at the napkin. Then at Larry. "That list is going to outrun the paper," I said. He said he had more. So we went through it. The $90,000 given to Aaron and Lacey for the Zionsville house down payment 3 years back. A gift, no paperwork, no expectation of return. Because Aaron was my son and you didn't put contracts on that kind of thing. Every dollar of Aaron's college tuition from 2007 through 2011. A car repair the year after the wedding, $4, $200 when Aaron's transmission went. Medical deductibles on 2 separate occasions. A water heater for the Zionsville house 18 months ago, flagged by Aaron as an emergency, which I paid without asking further questions. And the $48,000 out of the secondary account. Larry recorded it all in that tight, methodical handwriting of his figures marching down the napkin in a neat column. When the list was complete, he summed it, wrote the total underneath, and rotated the napkin to face me. I held my eyes on that number. Larry, I said. Yeah, he said. That's not, I know what it is. He said, it's 30 years of punching in Douglas. It's Nancy's share of everything you and she assembled together over a lifetime. It isn't nothing. It was never nothing. Something burned behind my eyes. I set 2 fingers across the bridge of my nose and held them there, breathing deliberately. Around us, the steak and shake carried on its regular Monday night rhythm, oil hissing in the kitchen, a family loud in the neighboring booth, some country song keeping low time above our heads. Ordinary, constant, utterly unbothered by the napkin between us. She'd have caught it, I said. My voice came out with an edge I hadn't intended. Nancy would have spotted what was happening well ahead of me. Larry sat with that for a beat. Then, she also would have told you that catching it earlier wouldn't change the next step. I nodded, picked up my coffee, set it back down without drinking. He's been telling people my memory is going, I said. My neighbor sent me a text, said Aaron had mentioned I'd been having some trouble keeping things straight. Larry's face didn't shift much, his jaw pulled tight by maybe 2 digs, which, on Larry, registered the same as someone else overturning a table. When did that come through? He asked. Tonight, I said. On the drive over, he lifted his coffee, drank from it slowly, and with deliberate calm, replaced the cup. So, Aaron isn't only covering his tracks, Larry said. He's laying groundwork. If you come forward later, there's already a ready-made portrait of you, as someone whose word can't be relied on. It settled into my chest like a sliver of ice. Yes, I said. That is precisely what it is. Across the table, Larry's expression held no pity. Pity wasn't something he dealt in, but there was something in it I can only describe as a restrained and quietly furious regard. You need a lawyer, he said. Roger had said the same thing just that morning. I reached into my coat and came out with the card Roger had tucked into my palm in the parking garage before we'd each gone our separate directions. Denise Fontaine, attorney at law. Roger had already given me her number. Larry looked at the card, then at me. Don't wait until tomorrow, he said. Tonight. I looked back at the napkin. That number, at the bottom. 3 decades of early mornings compressed into a figure any stranger could take in at a glance. Yeah, I said. I'll call her. Through the window, the traffic on Dayton Avenue ran steadily in both directions, unhurried and indifferent to everything, the way the outside world always seems to keep its pace when your own world has just lurched sideways. I said goodbye to Larry, walked back out into the cold, and sat in the car until I'd located Denise Fontaine in my contacts. Roger had forwarded her number while I was still sitting in that bank parking garage and had already sent her a note asking about availability tomorrow. She responded within 4 minutes. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Works. Bring everything you have. I drove back to the Marriott, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and let myself into room 316. Nancy's photograph was where I'd positioned it on the desk next to the lamp. Getting complicated, Nan, I said. I lowered myself onto the edge of the bed and unfolded the napkin Larry had pressed into my hand. As I was leaving, creased into quarters passed over without ceremony, and took one more look at the figure written there. Then, I tucked it into the front pocket of Nancy's burgundy suitcase somewhere I would not lose track of it. Tuesday morning at 7:15, I called Roy Langley on my feet at the window of room 316, a cup of hotel coffee in hand that tasted like warm cardboard, watching a maintenance man working a scraper along the iced-over sidewalk below. Roy had been 3 houses down in Carmel for 14 years. He was the neighbor who brought back borrowed tools the same afternoon, and still had Nancy's name ready without prompting years after she was gone. When he'd messaged me the previous night about crossing paths with Aaron, I had read it 3 times over, reaching for some reading of it that came out innocent. By 7:15 Tuesday, I had given that up. Doug Roy said, answering on the second ring. Hey, everything all right? I wasn't entirely sure I should have sent you that message. I'm glad you did, I told him. Walk me through what Aaron said. Every word you remember. Roy paused, not from reluctance, just pulling it back up accurately. We bumped into each other at the hardware store on State Road 32. Saturday, I believe. He asked after you. Said he'd been a bit concerned. Said you'd been... Roy stopped for a moment. Said you'd been getting turned around lately, muddling up money matters, losing track of conversations that had already happened. He said he figured it was probably just the stress, but that the family had their eye on things. The walls of the hotel room felt like they had moved a foot closer. He said that, I said. Not really a question. Doug, at the time, I didn't make much of it, but I got home and turned it over, and something about it just sat wrong with me. You have always been one of the clearest-headed people I've known. Thank you, Roy, I said. You did the right thing telling me. I hung up and stood at the window for a long moment, watching the maintenance worker finish with the ice scraper and move on to the next section of sidewalk. Methodical, one section at a time. Aaron had been at that hardware store on Saturday 2 days before the shoes. 2 days before, he'd stood in his own kitchen and told his father to understand his place. He had already been laying the groundwork, planting the idea in the minds of people who knew me that my judgment might not be reliable. That if I started making noise about money or leveled any accusations, there was already a version of Douglas Kenyon out there who got confused and forgot things. It was, I had to admit, a smart play. It also sent something so cold through me that I had to set the coffee cup down before my grip gave out. I showered, put on the cleanest shirt, still left in the burgundy suitcase, and drove to Denise Fontaine's office on North Meridian Street in downtown Chicago. The building was older brick, a brass plate beside the door, listing 3 attorney names. Denise's was in the middle. Her office sat on the second floor at the end of a hallway that smelled like aged paper and radiator heat. The door was open when I arrived. She was already at her desk, working through something in a manila folder, reading glasses pushed up into her dark hair. She was 52, according to Roger, though she carried the kind of stillness about her that made age feel like an irrelevant category. She looked up when I knocked on the doorframe. "Mr. Kenyon," she said, "come in, close the door." I sat across from her and laid everything out on her desk. The bank statements Roger had printed the napkin from Steak and Shake on Shadeland Avenue, the screenshots of my transaction history on my phone, and a timeline I'd written out by hand at the Marriott Courtyard on Michigan Road at 6 that morning, because I hadn't been able to sleep and needed to do something with my hands. Denise read without speaking. She turned pages, slowly went back to reread 2 sections, made a small mark in the margin of 1 page with a pencil. Her face gave away nothing. I had the distinct impression that this was a woman who had sat across from a great many people in crisis and had learned somewhere along the way that the most useful thing she could offer them was exactly this: someone who did not react. After 11 minutes, she turned to the last page and stopped. "Mr. Kenyon," she said. Her voice had shifted not alarm, but a precision that hadn't been there before. "Did you apply for a personal loan from a private lender called Summit Capital Solutions at any point in the last 2 years? The name meant nothing to me. "No," I said. "I've never taken out a personal loan, not once in my life." She turned the page toward me. It was a loan application. The header read, "Summit Capital Solutions, Personal Finance Agreement." The borrower information was mine, my name, my social security numbers, last 4 digits, my Carmel address, my date of birth. The loan amount was $15,000 at 24% annual interest. The disbursement line listed a bank account I did not recognize. At the bottom was a signature. It looked like mine. It had the same general shape as my signature, the hard capital D, the way the last letters of Kenyon trailed off. But I had not written it. I knew this the way you know your own handwriting, the way you know your own face. "That's not my signature," I said. My voice came out very level, which cost me more than I would have liked to admit. My hands were flat on my knees under the desk, pressing down hard enough that my knuckles ached. "I didn't think it was," Denise said. She took the page back and set it precisely in line with the others. "What you're looking at is called forgery. In Indiana, signing another person's name on a financial document without their consent is a felony, a 5th-degree felony at minimum, potentially higher, depending on the amount and intent. Combined with the use of my personal identifying information, it also constituted identity theft under federal law." She paused. "Do you know whose account received the $15,000? I thought about the disbursement line, the unfamiliar account number. "I have a guess," I said. "So do I," Denise said. "I'll need to verify it through proper channels, but based on what I'm seeing here," she tapped the folder, "this was not your son." The words rearranged something in my chest. "You're saying Lacey did this?" "I'm saying the evidence points in that direction," Denise said carefully, And I'm saying that your son may not have known about it. She looked at me directly. That changes the picture somewhat. I sat with that for a moment. The radiator in the corner ticked steadily. Outside on North Meridian Street, a bus went by, its engine low and grinding. Aaron had taken money from my account. That was true. Aaron had stood in his kitchen and told me to understand my place. That was true. But Lacey had forged my name on a loan application and directed $15,000 into an account that wasn't even Aaron's. And Aaron, if Denise was right, had no idea it existed. My son had betrayed me, and someone had been betraying both of us. What do I do? I said. Denise folded her hands on the desk. First, you don't call either of them. You don't send money. You don't sign anything that comes from them or anyone connected to them. She picked up her pen. Second, I send a letter to Summit Capital Solutions disputing the loan on the grounds of forgery and requesting a fraud investigation. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, they are required to investigate, and if fraud is confirmed, to remove the debt from your name entirely. And Lacey, if the investigation confirms forgery, the lender notifies law enforcement. That process moves on its own from there. Denise looked at me over her reading glasses. Your job right now is not to punish anyone, Mr. Kenyon. Your job is to protect yourself. Let the process do the rest. I nodded. My jaw was tight enough to ache. One more thing, Denise said. She slid a legal pad across the desk toward me with a list of bullet points in her handwriting. I want to pull the full financial picture, all accounts connected to your name, any inquiries made in the last 36 months. There may be more we haven't found yet. She said it the way a doctor says we may want to run a few more tests. Calm, professional, giving nothing away. But I heard what was underneath it. Brace yourself. I picked up the legal pad, read through her bullet points, and felt something settle in my chest that was not peace exactly, but was close to its practical equivalent. The feeling of a problem that has been named, that has a plan attached to it, that is no longer simply a weight you are carrying alone in a hotel room at 11 or 0 at night. All right, I said, let's find out what else there is. Denise called at 2:17 on Wednesday afternoon. I was sitting in the Marriott parking lot of all places. I had gone out to get lunch from a deli 2 blocks over, and then somehow ended up just sitting in the car with a turkey sandwich. I wasn't eating, watching people come and go through the hotel's automatic doors and thinking about nothing in particular, which was what my brain did when it was working very hard on something. It wasn't ready to look at directly. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Denise Fontaine. I picked up before the second ring. Mr. Kenyon. She said, I've been working through the documentation from Summit Capital Solutions this morning. In the process of requesting the loan file, I also submitted a broader financial inquiry connected to the fraud investigation standard procedure when we're establishing that someone's identity was used without consent. All right, I said. The inquiry returned something I want to discuss with you in person, but I can give you the overview now. A pause, brief, precise. Lacey Kenyon has a personal financial account that does not carry your son's name. It was opened approximately 16 months ago at a credit union on the west side of Chicago. The turkey sandwich sat on the passenger seat untouched. In the 14 months since, regular transfers have been made into that account from the joint checking account she shares with Aaron. How regular? I said. Between $400 and $800 per month, Denise said. Sometimes twice a month. Never a round number, which suggests deliberate structuring to avoid drawing attention. Another pause. The total transferred into that account over 14 months is approximately nigh $200. I pressed my free hand flat against the steering wheel and held it there. What I was about to learn wasn't just about money. It was about how far someone who shared my table and my trust had actually been willing to go and how long they'd been going there. Before we get to that, I want to ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you was working against you, quietly, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and gather every last piece of proof first? Had any of that money started in my account? That's what I'm trying to pin down, I told her. Denise said she'd need a few more days to trace the whole chain, but she wanted me ready for the possibility that, yes, it had. She delivered that the way she delivered everything, flat and unadorned, no cushioning, just the information set in front of me to deal with. Full report by Friday, she said. I thanked her. Then she said there was one more thing, and the way she said it made my hand close harder around the phone. The account Lacey had opened there was a beneficiary designation attached to it, not Aaron. She let that sit a moment. She thought I should know. I didn't move the car, just stayed there in that lot long after the call ended, not Aaron. Lacey had set up a private account on her own, had been feeding money into it over the course of more than a year, and whoever stood to inherit it wasn't her husband. She'd been constructing a trapdoor under her own life, a way out built in silence, and the care she'd taken, the steadiness of it hit me in a way I hadn't expected even now, even with everything I already knew. My mind drifted back to those shoes on my kitchen floor, dropped without a glance in my direction. Clean those, said, the way you speak to furniture to something whose only function is to be useful and stay out of the way. I reached for the sandwich, set it back down. Larry turned up at my door at 6:00, 2 coffees in hand, from the spot on Morse Road he knew I favored because that's the kind of thing Larry Beaumont noticed quietly without ever turning it into a moment. He knocked the way he always did. 2 sharp raps. When I opened up, he took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" No question mark. A statement. "Come in," I said. He pulled out the desk chair. I settled on the bed's edge. Then I laid out what Denise had told me. The hidden account, the transfers going in, month after month, the beneficiary who wasn't Aaron. Larry sat with his elbows on his knees and his cup clasped in both hands, and he listened. When I finished, he held his silence for precisely the length of time a piece of genuinely ugly news requires. "She's been building herself an exit," he said. "That's how it reads," I said. "All while Aaron was telling you they were barely keeping their heads above water." Larry's voice flattened into something I'd heard from him before. Not rage, but that colder thing, the tone of a man who has moved past shock and arrived at contempt. While he was raiding your account rather than admit he needed help, she was draining out the back. "Yes," I said. Larry stared down into his cup. "Douglas, your son doesn't just have a problem." He paused. "He's been drowning in one and had no idea." I'd been circling this since the parking lot. What Aaron had done to me was real, it stood on its own, and nothing Lacey had done touched it. The money taken from my account was taken. The words spoken in his kitchen were spoken. His choices, his to own. But today I'd seen a face of my son I hadn't registered before. A man bleeding out quietly for months, too humiliated to go to his father, too stiff-necked to go to his wife, propping up the whole sagging thing with one hand, while the other went somewhere it had no business going. And the whole time just behind him, out of his sight entirely, his wife had been running her own separate arithmetic. "He doesn't know about the account," I said. "No," Larry said. "I don't believe he does. That doesn't excuse what he did." "No," Larry said again. "It doesn't, but it shifts what you're actually up against." I nodded, wrapped my hand around the coffee cup. Lukewarm by now. I finished it regardless. My phone buzzed from my coat pocket. I expected Denise or Roger. The name on the screen wasn't either of them. One I hadn't come across in months. Sharon Ingram. I looked over at Larry. His eyebrow went up. "Lacey's mother," I said. "Ah," said Larry, with all the gravity of a man who has run into Sharon Ingram's type somewhere in his own past. I picked up. "Douglas." Sharon's voice carried a particular kind of warmth, the sort you find in certain soups where the heat is working overtime to disguise the fact that there's not much beneath it worth eating. "I hope this isn't a bad moment." "What can I do for you, Sharon?" I said. "Well, I've been worried. About everyone, honestly. About where things stand." A soft exhalation. "I know it's been strained, and I know you and Lacey haven't seen eye to eye, but Douglas, whatever's going on between the grown-ups, Nora is the one who ends up carrying it. She's been asking for you every single day. Did you know that Nora's name went in like a key. I felt it in the center of my chest, warm and sharp together, exactly where Sharon had aimed it. "I know Nora misses me," I said, keeping my voice even. "She drew you a picture," Sharon said. "At school, told her teacher it was for her grandpa because he was sad." A pause that carried the full freight of a grandmother wielding a grandchild. "I just feel like for Nora's sake, if nothing else, maybe it's worth trying to settle this. Children need things to be steady, Douglas. They need the adults around them to show that problems can be worked through." I looked past Sharon's voice to Nancy's photograph sitting on the desk. Nancy, who had never in 30 years of marriage pulled a child into the middle of an adult dispute, who had held right down to her bones that children were to be guarded from the wreckage of grown-up problems not handed to one side as ammunition. "Sharon," I said, "I genuinely share your concern for Nora, completely. But what's happening here goes well beyond a falling out. There are financial matters involved, serious ones, and they have to be handled properly. A pause on her end. Financial matters. What does that mean? Exactly what I said, I told her. Thank you for calling Sharon. I ended the call. Larry had been studying me with an expression that passed for him as admiration. Smooth, he said. She'll be on the phone with Lacey in about 4 minutes. Probably 3, Larry said. What are you going to do about Nora? I thought about the purple star pajamas, the stuffed rabbit with the bent ear, the way Nora had locked both arms around my neck on the stairs and wouldn't let go. Nora has nothing to do with this, I said. She never did. Larry nodded slow and deliberate and set his cup beside Nancy's photograph on the desk. He looked at it for a beat, then back at me. No, he said quietly. She never did. After Larry walked out, the room filled up, not with noise. The Marriott courtyard on Michigan Road was still as a held breath at 9:00 on a Wednesday, just the heating unit cycling and a car moving past now and then beyond the glass. The noise was all interior, the kind that crowds in when you're sealed in a small space with something that won't resolve when every conversation has been had and every task has run dry, and all that remains is to stay with it. So I did. Nora and I hadn't spoken since Sunday, 4 days. In the 8 weeks I'd been under that roof, not one of them had passed, without me seeing her, without oatmeal with maple syrup on the stove, or the school run, or sitting through another chapter of Chester the Frog's behavioral history. 4 days had the weight of months. I picked up the phone, put it down, lifted it again. Sharon's voice kept threading through everything else. She asks about you every day. She made you a picture. I understood on some clear-eyed level that Sharon had used those details the way you use a blade, precisely at short range, finding the gap she'd known was there. Understanding that didn't dull it any. Knowing how a wound is made has never once kept it from bleeding. Ask anyone who's watched themselves reach for something they already know will cost them. I went into my banking app, pulled up the transfer screen, keyed in Aaron's account number. From memory, 23 months of watching it move through transaction records had fixed it in my head, whether I'd asked it to or not. I entered an amount, not everything, only enough to cover a single month's mortgage, enough to keep the power running, enough that Nora wouldn't walk through her front door one afternoon to find the world had rearranged itself and no one had thought to tell her why. My thumb stopped over the confirm button. I stayed there a long time. The room's heating unit ticked on, filling the silence with its low mechanical drone. Somewhere outside, a car alarm started up 2 blocks off the maybe 3, screamed for half a minute, then cut out. The brown patch on the ceiling stared back at me, the way it always did. I turned the phone over and laid it on the duvet. Both palms went to my face. I breathed until my heartbeat stopped racing, because this wasn't new territory. Not the specifics of it. Not this room, this phone, this particular string of digits on a screen, but the shape of it. That old familiar weight, a crisis I could shrink temporarily by opening my checkbook. The relief that followed. I knew that relief well. What I also knew was what it cost, more always than whatever figure I'd written on the line. I had been buying myself out of this feeling for years longer than I wanted to examine too closely. And Aaron had absorbed the lesson the way children absorb everything quietly, completely, without you realizing you'd taught it. He'd learned that if circumstances grew bad enough, if he endured long enough, the money would materialize. Not because I was indifferent to his character, but because somewhere along the way, my love for him had gotten tangled up with fixing things for him. I had spent decades treating those two things as the same. He grew up believing they were. So did I. I reached for the phone again, not to make a transfer, but to pull up Larry's messages. Sharon used Nora. I typed almost worked. He came back in under 2 minutes. Almost doesn't count. Hold the line, Douglas. I set the phone down on the nightstand and left it there. Nancy's photograph sat on the desk. The lamp threw a warm glow across her face, and she was smiling at whatever she always smiled at. In that picture, the afternoon light of our backyard in Carmel, the summer that particular shot was taken. Something I'd said that struck her as funny. I had never been able to retrieve it no matter how many times I tried. 3 years of reaching for that memory and coming back empty. What would you do with this? I asked her silently. She kept smiling. The lamp droned on. I stretched out on the duvet and let myself think genuinely, think about what Nancy would have done. Not the hazy, wishful version of her that grief sometimes produces. The real one. The woman who for 30 years had been more clear-eyed than me on nearly every matter worth being clear-eyed about and had never pretended otherwise. She wouldn't have wired the money. She would have been devastated about Nora, bone-deep, real devastation, the kind that had always moved through her when a situation demanded something painful from her. And then, she would have done the painful thing regardless. That was what set Nancy apart from me even now, even with me sitting at 60 years old in a hotel room with bank statements fanned across the desk like an accounting of my failures. You cannot love someone into becoming responsible. You can only love them while they learn to be. She'd said those exact words to me once years back over a matter that had nothing to do with Aaron. I'd heard them and filed them away, as the kind of thing that sounded more applicable than it probably was. I understood now that it had always been applicable. It was a description of something I'd been doing wrong my entire adult life. I did not send the money. I lay there instead and thought about Nora in her classroom, bent over a piece of paper, drawing a picture of me, handing it to her teacher and saying it was for her grandpa because he was sad. The grief that produced in my chest was genuine and large and cold. It swept through me like a front moving through. And then, after a while, it began to ease. Because Nora was going to be fine. She had the purple star pajamas and Chester the frog and the rabbit with the one ear that never stayed straight, and she had a father who was at enormous cost to himself, beginning to reckon with who he'd become. She was 7 years old. She was going to be all right. She had never been the reason I needed to stay firm. She was the reason I needed to do it correctly. I drifted off at some point past midnight, the lamp burning, Nancy still looking out from the desk. Thursday morning, 9/17, still in the same clothes. A knock at the door of room 316 brought me upright. I didn't need the peephole to know who it was. The sound of the knock itself told me, hesitant in a way that Aaron's knocking had never once been, but steady too, planted, not retreating. This was someone who'd spent 40 minutes in a car working himself up to a door and wasn't going to turn around before it opened. I checked through the peephole anyway. Aaron was standing in the hallway in a polo shirt that had been slept in. Stubble 2 days deep. The shadows beneath his eyes went back much further than last night. One hand held a paper cup from a gas station. His gaze was aimed at the floor. It took me straight back to when he was 12. The Hendersons' garage window, the baseball that went through it, the drive over to their house where I'd made him apologize in person. He'd stood on that porch with his fists buried in his pockets and his eyes fixed on his own shoes. Even then, even as furious as I was, something in me had thought he's going to be okay. He understands what it means to have done something wrong. The ache in my chest was so complete, it felt structural, like an old fracture finding the cold. I opened the door. "Dad?" Aaron's voice had that particular roughness that comes from nights without sleep and days spent in argument with yourself. "Can I come in?" I studied him. He held my gaze. His eyes were reddened and glassy, and he made no effort to conceal it. That I realized was the first undefended moment I'd witnessed from him. I couldn't say how long. "Yes," I said. "Come on in." He chose the chair at the desk, not the one by the window where Larry had settled the previous evening, but the narrow upright one hotel's station at the work surface that guests almost never actually work at. He lowered himself into it like a man seeking its structure, needing something at his back that wouldn't give way. He set his coffee cup beside Nancy's photograph, glanced at her face for a beat, and whatever crossed his expression, he reclaimed it before I could read it. I took the edge of the bed, 6 feet between us, roughly. It was the right interval, near enough to talk, enough space that neither of us would feel managed. We sat with the silence for a moment. Neither of us was quite ready. We were both circling the entry point. Aaron got there first. "I lost my job." A pause. "Not recently. Almost a year ago now." The confession arrived without ornamentation, flat scrubbed, a feeling the product of having turned it over in his head so many times that the raw edges had worn away. His gaze was fixed somewhere in the middle distance between his knees and the carpet. His jaw was set. Both hands gripped the coffee cup like it was the only thing anchoring him. "I know," I said. His eyes snapped to mine. "Denise pulled the employment records as part of her review," I said. "She told me 2 days ago." Something passed across his face. Relief was part of it, the relief of not having to land that blow unaided. But there was something layered underneath it that I chose not to dig into. "Dayton," he said, "regional operations director. 2 rounds of interviews, then a third conversation with a recruiter that was framed as a near certainty." He paused, swallowed. I watched his throat move with the effort. The rejection had arrived by email on a Friday the 6th for reading in the evening. He'd been sitting in the driveway when he opened it. He'd stayed in the car for 40 minutes before he could make himself go inside. "Did you tell Lacey?" I asked. "Not right away." His voice gave slightly on the last syllable, just a hairline fracture, and he breathed through it, lips pressed together. A couple of weeks later, I told her the position hadn't come through, but that I was already talking to someone else, which was partially true. His eyes dropped back to his hands. There was no someone else. There were resumes out. A handful of calls that went nowhere. I knew they were going nowhere. And I kept telling her we were close, that something was about to come together. And the money, and I said. The flinch moved through his whole body. Not dramatic small, contained but visible, in the way a wince is visible when you press on tissue that's still healing. The first time I went into the account, he said I told myself it was a bridge, that I'd put it back before you ever had cause to look. I took $200 in March because we were short on the mortgage and I couldn't explain the shortfall to Lacey without explaining everything. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. June had brought the car insurance. August was a credit card minimum he'd let spiral past, the point of easy management. Every single time he'd promised himself it was over, that the money would go back, that I would never find out. The last word collapsed in his throat and silence took over. His jaw kept moving. His eyes were brilliant and wet, and every muscle in his face was working against what was rising up behind them, a fight I knew by heart because I had first watched him wage it when he was 8 years old, sprawled on the pavement in front of 3 neighborhood kids after coming off his bike, and had resolved with all the furious pride a small boy can muster that he was not going to let a single tear fall. He was losing it now. So why had he kept the job loss from me? That was what I asked. The words came out softer than I'd planned. Aaron, why hadn't he picked up and called? He raised his eyes, and the thing looking back at me from his face was nothing I'd been given access to in years. Not the anger, not the flat blank wall he'd been holding up for months. Something else entirely. Something stripped back and exposed and honestly ashamed. Because I couldn't stand you knowing, he said. His voice trembled as he said it, and he didn't try to steady it. Dad, every time you came through for me, every time a bill got handled or something broke and you fixed it or you stepped in before I had to ask it landed. Every single time, like I was unraveling in front of you, frame by frame, and you were being kind about it, which turned out to be harder to absorb than anger would have been. I never thought you were failing, I said. I know you didn't. His voice split, and both hands went up over his face and stayed there, breath forcing its way through his palms in short, hard pulls, his shoulders jerking once and then again. When the hands came down, his eyes were wet and his face had gone red, and he held my gaze without flinching. I know you didn't, Dad, but I did. And the more you helped, the worse the weight got, not better. And I was so. The voice buckled again. He forced through the gap. I was so mortified by my own need for you that I turned it backward and made you feel like a burden instead. And that is the most upside down thing I have ever managed to do. And I know that the ache sitting in my chest right then was vast, enormous. It was carrying his name. None of it absolved one thing he had done. And at the same time, both of those facts were true and real and sitting side by side, and I was going to be sorting out what to do with that for a long while. Yet, Aaron, I said, there's something I have to ask you. He gave a short nod, pressed his wrist to his eyes for a moment, then lowered his hands to his knees. Did you know, I said, choosing my words, that Lacey had taken out a personal loan using my name? The blood left his face in an instant. Not slowly the way a man drains when something difficult registers all at once, completely like a man whose footing has just vanished. What? The word was barely sound at all. $15,000. Private lender, I said. My name on the application, my information, my signature, except I had never put pen to paper. The funds had gone somewhere I couldn't account for. Aaron sat very still. His mouth opened and shut. His fingers dug into his knees until his knuckles bleached, then went paler still. I didn't. He stopped. Tried again. I had no knowledge of any loan. I know, I said. Dad. The voice came apart, not performed, not calculated, just cracked wide open raw and in free fall. I swear to you, I did not know about a loan. I believe you, I said. His face went into his hands again, but the reason was different now. This time the shaking coming through his shoulders was unrestrained, and the sound that leaked out from behind his palms wasn't something he was fighting to hold back. It was broken and used up and exhausted. The sound of someone who had been bracing a collapsing structure with his bare hands for close to a year, only to find out that the whole time someone else had been methodically pulling the underpinning loose. I gave him the room to have it. I stayed where I was. My hand didn't go to his shoulder. I sat on the edge of the bed and I let my son carry the full weight of what had gathered in that room because it was his to carry. And stepping in to take it from him one more time would have been the most wrong thing left for me to do. The shaking wound down eventually. He raised his head. His face looked like wreckage, red and wet, and peeled back to a layer I hadn't glimpsed since his teenage years. "I'm going home," he said. His voice had found some footing, though. Not much. "I need to go through our statements. I need to see what's actually been going on." "Yes," I said. "You do." He got to his feet, reached for the gas station coffee cup, then set it back on the desk. His hands weren't reliable enough for it. He looked over at Nancy's photograph, then back to me. "Dad." He pulled a breath down slowly. "I'm sorry. Not about the money, for Sunday, for the kitchen, for the things I said while standing there." His voice fell to something just north of silence. "I've been carrying shame about myself for a long time now. You were the nearest target. That's what I'm most sorry for." I looked at him, at the ruined, undisguised face of my son. "Go home, Aaron. Go look at your statements." He nodded. He crossed to the door and laid his hand on the knob. Then he went still, his back toward me, and when his voice came it was rough and low, and nothing about it was guarded. He said he hadn't breathed a word to Lacey about coming, hadn't said a thing. Then the door opened and he was gone, and I sat listening to his footsteps diminish down the corridor toward the elevator, alone, on the edge of the hotel bed, my hands resting on my knees, the room's quiet thickening around me. Nancy was still smiling from the desk. I know I told her. I know. 20 minutes had passed since Aaron's footsteps faded before I finally pushed myself upright. I went to the window and stood there. The November sky was that specific tone of gray that Indiana holds better than any other place on Earth. Not the gray of drama, not the gray of a storm gathering itself, just the calm, settled gray of a sky that has made its decision and harbors no guilt about it. The parking lot below sat half empty, a loose scattering of cars across the asphalt. A woman in a red coat moved along the sidewalk at the lot's edge, a small dog on a lead. The dog pulled up short to examine something by the curb. She stood and let him. Everything continuing at its unremarkable pace, the way life does, indifferent, uninterrupted. I showered and pulled from Nancy's burgundy suitcase the last clean shirt. I had a green flannel, packed without any particular intention, which turned out to be the one I reached for every Saturday morning in Carmel when the day had no agenda. I'd picked it up 3 winters back at the Tractor Supply on State Road 32. The first time Nancy saw me wearing it, she told me I looked like a retired lumberjack, and her tone had made clear she considered that a point in its favor. I was at the mirror working the buttons when my phone brightened on the dresser. Not a phone call, a video call. The name on the screen did something quick and complicated inside my chest. Nora iPad. I answered it. Her face filled the frame too close, the way it invariably did, heavy on forehead, one eye, in focus the edge of a purple star pajama collar, blurring across the bottom. She was in her room. The bookshelf placed her and Chester's terrarium was just visible past her left shoulder. Her hair had that particular quality that arrives after sleep and departs only when someone introduces a hairbrush. "Grandpa," she said. The volume caught me off guard. "You're here. Hey, move back a little, bug. I can practically count your pores." A laugh came out of her, then a genuine one rising from somewhere deep, and she shuffled back across the bed until her whole face filled the picture. She had a piece of paper in one hand and was brandishing it toward the camera. "I made you something," she said. "Look." She raised it directly in front of the lens, blotting herself out completely. What came through was a crayon rendering of what I was reasonably certain was intended as a horse, 4 legs, an extravagant orange scribble of mane, a tail arching upward with considerably more confidence than biological faithfulness. The overall effect was strongly reminiscent of a very tall dog. At the bottom, written in the oversized, deliberate print of a child who has only recently grasped that letters add up to words, it said, "For Grandpa." Something caught in my throat that I hadn't seen coming. "Nora," I told her, "that is the finest horse anybody has ever drawn in the history of horses." She dropped the paper slightly and lit up. "It's a thoroughbred," she announced with the full conviction of someone who had learned a new word recently and planned to deploy it at every opportunity like the ones in Kentucky. "We learned about them. It looks exactly like a Kentucky thoroughbred," I said. "I know." She folded it with great care, the deliberate way kids handle something they plan to keep forever. "Grandpa, are you coming to my birthday?" Something knotted in my stomach. "When is it tomorrow?" She told me, then stopped herself and drew herself up with tremendous gravity. No. The day after tomorrow. Saturday. Sweetheart, I know when your birthday falls. Mom said you might be too busy. No accusation in it, she delivered the words plainly, the way you state a fact. But those eyes of hers were fixed on me, with an attention so particular, so steady, that it put me in mind of Nancy so strongly, it sometimes took the air right out of me. Are you too busy? No, I said. I'm not too busy. Are you going to come? Her face filled the screen, those serious eyes, one hand still gripping the horse, drawing an orange crayon smudge on her left thumb she hadn't yet discovered. Yes, I said. I'll be there. Her whole face cracked open into a grin that pushed her eyes nearly closed. Yes, okay. There's going to be a Costco cake, and Jordan is coming, and I'm getting a new book about horses, and Mom got those little hot dogs in the blankets that I like. Pig in a blanket, I said. That's a weird name, she said. It is, I agreed, but they're good. They're really good, she said solemnly. We stayed on another 10 minutes, the horse drawing Chester the frog and his recent peculiar behavior, and a book Nora was working through at school, featuring a dragon who was simultaneously a librarian, a combination she found deeply puzzling and somehow irresistible. I just let her go. There was no reason to redirect her. Something about the particular drift of a 7-year-old's conversation, horses to frogs to librarian dragons, no bridge required, was the nearest I'd come to feeling settled in 6 days. When her dad finally called her in for breakfast and she had to sign off, she lifted the horse drawing to the camera one last time. I'm going to hand you this one in person, she said, at my birthday. I'll be there, I said. Promise. After the call ended, I stayed on the edge of the bed, phone resting in my lap, watching the dull gray of the Indiana sky beyond the window for a few minutes. Then I picked up the phone again and called Denise. I'm going to the birthday party tomorrow, I said as soon as she answered. A short pause on her end. I had a feeling you would be. Is everything ready? It'll all be done before end of day, Denise said. I'll have it printed and sorted for you by this afternoon, bank statements, the loan application. Everything tied to the secondary account. Her tone stayed level, composed, but underneath it in a woman less measured than Denise Fontaine, you might have called it, quiet satisfaction. Douglas, she said, whatever goes on at that party, you are not walking in there to win a fight. You're going to see your granddaughter. I'm aware of that, I said. Good. A beat of silence. Go see your granddaughter. I headed out to the craft store along the 86th Street corridor and picked up a beginner's art kit for Nora, a tin case holding colored pencils, watercolor paints, 2 brushes, and a pair of small canvases, the sort of gift that could hold a 7-year-old's attention for weeks on end. I wrapped it myself, using paper from the Walgreens next door green, with gold stars, which I thought looked all things considered genuinely presentable. Then I went back to the Marriott, settled at the desk, and turned my mind to what I was actually walking toward. Not just a birthday party. Lacey had called in family. People who knew Douglas Kenyon. People who'd watched me for years, who'd been fed some account of events from Sharon, from Lacey, from whoever else had passed along a version of this story, carefully edited to exclude certain financial records. She'd gathered people loyal to her in a home she commanded at a gathering, where leaving early would read as precisely the unhinged, volatile conduct she'd been attributing to me. She had no idea what I was carrying through that door. She didn't know that Aaron had been in this same room Thursday morning, head in his hands, saying things out loud that he couldn't pull back. And she didn't know that, tucked inside my jacket in a manila envelope, was a complete record of 23 months of transactions, a forged loan application bearing her name on the disbursement line, and evidence of a private account she had been quietly assembling for more than a year. I set the wrapped present by the door, so I'd have no chance of leaving it behind. Then I turned to Nancy's photograph on the desk. I'm going to need you on this one, Nan, I said. The lamp gave its low hum. Somewhere, while I hadn't been watching the Indiana sky outside, had turned fully dark, and the parking lot lights were blinking on in the cold, one after another. I got into bed at 9:30, the envelope on the nightstand. Nora's promise settled somewhere warm just below my ribs. There were 14 cars on Sycamore Lane when I came around the corner that Saturday afternoon. I counted them deliberately because it gave my hands an occupation other than squeezing the steering wheel harder than I already was. 14 cars. I'd figured on maybe 6. A handful of family, a few kids from Nora's class, the ordinary scatter of guests who drift through a 7-year-old's party, collect some Costco cake, and clear out before 4. What was waiting on Sycamore Lane in Zionsville was a different order of thing entirely. I pulled in behind an unfamiliar minivan at the far end of the block and sat there for 2 minutes without moving. The manila envelope was right where I'd put it inside my jacket against my chest. I was conscious of it the way you're conscious of anything you're carrying when it matters not. Because you're touching it, but because you know it's there. The birthday present sat on the passenger seat beside me. Green paper with gold stars. Nora's name on the tag in my own hand. I took the present, stepped out, and started up toward the house. Lacey pulled the front door open before my foot hit the porch steps. Cream-colored blouse hair carefully arranged and that brightness she wore when an audience was present. The switched-on version of Lacey Kenyon, calibrated to project exactly what she needed people to see. She looked at me and smiled. The smile was wide and smooth and didn't travel anywhere near her eyes, not within 6 inches. "Douglas," she said, "I'm so glad you came." "Nora invited me," I said. Something moved behind her eyes. Then the smile resettled. She stepped aside. The rooms were packed. I took a quiet inventory as I came through the entry. Aunt Joanne, Aaron's father's sister, near the fireplace, holding something red. 2 of Lacey's real estate colleagues, the ones I remembered from the wine night a couple of months back, already at full volume. Aaron's cousin Tate, up from Plainfield. Sharon Ingram had claimed the kitchen island the way a vessel finds a harbor, her holiday card smile distributed to the room in even indiscriminate portions. And then Nora came launching out of the living room the instant her eyes found me, nearly clipping an end table on the way, and hit me hard enough around the middle that I had to shuffle back a step to stay upright. "You came," she said, face pressed into my jacket. "You actually came. I said I would. I told her." I rested my hand on top of her head. 2 braids already starting to work themselves loose, which was just as it should be. "Happy birthday, Bug." She leaned back and looked up with the kind of pure, undiluted happiness that only exists at 7. "Is that for me?" Her gaze kept drifting to the green paper with gold stars package. "That one is yours, no question." I told her, though she'd have to hold out until present time. She latched onto my hand and towed me toward the living room with the unshakable assurance of a child who has never entertained the idea that a grown-up might prefer not to be towed. The first 30 minutes belonged entirely to the party. Nora worked through the gifts from other guests, letting out shrieks of entirely genuine excitement over an art supply set from Aunt Joanne. When Nora lifted the box to show the room, I caught Lacey's gaze sliding sideways toward me, quick appraising gone. Then came a book about horses from Tate that Nora announced was the single greatest gift she had ever received in her life, a verdict I managed not to dispute given everything. The little hot dogs and rolls were spread along the kitchen counter, and they delivered on the promise, genuinely surprisingly good. I filled a plate, fell into conversation with Tate about his drive up from Plainfield, and offered nods in the right places as Joanne talked about the upcoming holidays. Aaron stayed at the fringes of things, topping off drinks, shuttling dishes to the sink, answering whoever spoke to him, but his eyes kept returning to mine. Each time they did, I saw what I had seen Thursday morning, written plainly in them. That scraped, red-rimmed look of a man who has not been sleeping, who has been keeping company with uncomfortable truths in rooms that have gone very still around him. Our eyes connected once across the length of the living room. The nod he gave me was slight enough that most people wouldn't have caught it. I gave one back. Lacey caught it. I watched the exact moment it landed. The mental arithmetic that followed was visible, a fast recalibration, her jaw pulling just slightly tighter. She hadn't known Aaron had shown up at the Marriott Courtyard on Michigan Road. She hadn't known what had passed between us Thursday morning in room 316, but that single nod told her something had rearranged itself between her husband and his father, and whatever she'd been counting on was no longer certain. She placed her glass on the counter. My fingers found the envelope through my jacket pocket. "Since everyone's here," Lacey said, pitching her voice above the room's noise with the particular authority of someone who has decided the room is going to listen, regardless. "Maybe Douglas can explain to the rest of us why he's been working to yank the roof off his own granddaughter's head." Conversation unraveled thread by thread. Aaron froze near the kitchen doorway, a sheaf of paper plates in his grip. Sharon Ingram came upright at the island. Tate's gaze moved between Lacey and me, with the careful look of someone who has just registered that this is not the event he thought he attended. "Lacey," Aaron's voice was low and strung tight. "Don't. I believe people have a right to understand what's been going on here," Lacey said, She addressed the room with the fluid ease of someone who had run through this scene many times in private. Douglas chose to cut off support for this family. That isn't what happened, I said. Over a personal dispute with me, he's been shifting funds around, backing out of commitments, making threats. Erin's voice broke like something striking a hard surface. Stop. She turned toward her husband. What she found in his face gave her pause. Something genuine moved through her expression for the first time. Not the polished warmth, not the version of herself she performed for rooms. Real uncertainty. Because Erin was not holding the line for her, the way he always had when she needed it held. The look he was giving her was the look of a man who has been carrying something very carefully for a very long time and has just without ceremony set it down for good. Out of the bedroom hallway, Nora burst in with the full velocity of a child who has made an exciting discovery and cannot contain it one more second. She had Erin's phone in her hand. The screen was glowing. Daddy! She held it up over her head as she ran. I found your phone on the dresser. Can I play something? It's still open? Every person in the room turned to look at her. She stood at the hallway entrance wearing her burgundy birthday dress with yellow flowers, the dress she had selected herself and described as very sophisticated. Holding Erin's phone up the way kids hold things they're proud to have found. The screen was angled outward bright, showing the banking app Erin had been using earlier that morning, the one he had obviously not closed before he set the phone down on his dresser. The account number showing on that screen was mine. I recognized it the way I recognized my own reflection. 23 months of encountering it in transaction records had printed it into memory as firmly as my home address. Lacey moved before anyone else did. 2 sharp steps toward Nora, one hand reaching out. Nora, give me... Erin put himself between them. No raised voice, no aggressive posture. He just occupied the space between his wife and his daughter and did not move. That perfect stillness was enough to stop Lacey cold. Erin... Her voice came down to barely above a whisper, urgent. It isn't... I know exactly what it is, he said. He lifted the phone from Nora's hand gently, took one look at the screen, and then raised his eyes to find his father across the room. The color had gone out of his face. Every layer of presentation had been stripped away, leaving only what was underneath. Dad, he said, show everyone what you're carrying. The room didn't breathe. I slipped my hand into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope. The night before, I had organized everything at the desk in room 316 with Nancy's photograph keeping watch from beside the lamp. Statements in front, loan paperwork behind, then the records of the secondary account, and the private transfers at the back. The first page went down on the kitchen island. Over 23 months, I said 48,400 moved out of an account tied to my name. Second page. Every single transaction was labeled a household emergency. A beat. There were no household emergencies. Third page. This is a loan application for $15,000 from a private lender. My name, my address, my signature. I looked up from the paper. I never signed it. The refrigerator hum was the only sound in the room. Tate reached over and lifted the first page from the island and read it through. His jaw went tight. He passed it across to Joanne without a word. Joanne's hand rose to cover her mouth. Sharon Ingram had turned the color of old chalk. Lacey's eyes shuttled between the documents, Erin and me moving fast. I could see the math running behind them, frantic hunting for some foothold that wasn't there. You went through my private, she began. I went through my own bank account, I said. Those transfers were mutually agreed. Lacey. Erin's voice was flat as a closed door, and it cut her off before she got to the end of her sentence. He looked at her. What was on his face wasn't anger in the conventional sense. It was something that had gone past anger, something quieter and considerably more durable. I went through every statement, including yours. Her chin came up. You had no right to do that. There is an account, Erin said, that you opened 16 months ago, one my name is not on, that has been pulling transfers from our joint checking every single month. His voice held the steadiness of something that has finished trembling, not because the emotion has left, but because the shaking has spent itself out. I want to know whose name sits on the beneficiary line. Lacey's mouth opened, then closed. It was the first time in all the years I had known her that Lacey Kenyon stood in a room with nothing to say. Sharon produced a sound that was part gasp and part word that never quite formed. Tate lowered the bank statement back onto the island with deliberate care, the careful way you handle something when you need a moment to collect yourself before speaking. I gathered the remaining pages and slid them back inside the envelope. I did not come here to put anyone out of their home, I said. I let my gaze travel the room. Joanne, Tate, Sharon, all the people who had walked through that door today carrying only the version of events they had been handed. I am not here out of anger. I have no interest in punishing my son. I looked at Aaron. But I am finished subsidizing a life in which I don't register as a human being. Nora had retreated to the hallway entrance while all of this unfolded. She stood in her burgundy birthday dress with yellow flowers, the horse drawing from yesterday, folded in her hand, watching every adult in the room with eyes that were far too steady and far too attentive for her age. I crossed to her, bent down my left knee, protesting sharply, and met her gaze. "Thank you for having me at your birthday," I said. That cake was something else. Her lower lip had started to shake. "Are you going home now?" "Not just yet," I said. "But I'll be back soon. That's a promise." She came at me with both arms, the force of it enough that I had to plant one hand on the floor to keep from going over. I held her there, the solid warmth of her pressed against me, the loose ends of her braids brushing my cheek. Then I got to my feet, picked up Nora's wrapped gift from where I had set it near the door, and pressed it into her hands. "Happy birthday, Bug," I said. I walked out of that house into the cold November afternoon and didn't look back once. I sat in the car a long while before I turned the key. Not because I was waiting on anything, not because I half expected the door to fly open, the way doors fly open in films, footsteps on the walk, a voice carrying your name down the street. I sat because my left knee was still throbbing from going down on that kitchen floor, and my hands hadn't quite settled, and I had just done something that couldn't be walked back, and I needed a moment alone with that before I went anywhere. From the street, the house looked like any other house. Same brick face, same bare flower beds along the front walk, same basketball hoop at the edge of the driveway that Nora had never touched, because she had always chosen frogs over sports. A perfectly ordinary house on a perfectly ordinary street on a Saturday afternoon in November. Inside it, nothing would ever be arranged quite the same way again. I started the engine and headed back to the Marriott. I heard what happened after I left from Aaron not that night. That night he didn't call, and I hadn't looked for him to. It was 3 days later, a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying that particular flatness you hear from people who have been threading through hard days on willpower alone. He told me the party came apart not long after I stepped out. Everyone found a reason to leave within 20 minutes. Sharon Ingram was the last one through the door. She moved past Aaron in the front hallway without a word, the Christmas card warmth scrubbed entirely from her expression, and drew the door shut behind her with a quietness that landed harder than a slam would have. Lacey packed a bag that same evening. She went about it with the efficient calm she brought to everything she organized. No raised voices, no sweeping declarations, just the steady, purposeful movements of a woman carrying out a plan she had been building for longer than anyone had realized. She called her mother. She called a car service. She carried her bag to the front door and then stopped. Nora was standing at the top of the stairs in her burgundy birthday dress, with yellow flowers still clutching the wrapped gift I had given her, watching her mother with wide, unblinking eyes. "Mommy," Nora's voice, Aaron told me, came out very small. Lacey looked up at her daughter and held that look for a long moment. Something moved across her face that Aaron said he couldn't fully name. Not guilt exactly, not regret exactly. Something that lived between those two things and didn't have a clean word attached to it. She climbed 3 steps, kissed Nora on the forehead, and told her she would see her soon. Then she walked out. Nora stayed at the top of the stairs, holding her unopened birthday present until Aaron went up and sat beside her, and they opened it together, the tin case of colored pencils and watercolor paints. It was exactly what she'd always wanted, Aaron told me. I had to look at the ceiling when he got to that part. Aaron stayed on in the Zionsville house. Keeping it, he said, had shifted from a given to a genuine question. The mortgage, the utilities, the reality of a single income that wasn't yet an income at all. He had spreadsheets open on the kitchen table every morning when he got up. He was making calls. He wasn't asking me for anything, which was new and which I noted. Denise called me that Monday morning. The dispute letter went out to Summit Capital Solutions that Monday afternoon. She told me they are required by law to open a fraud investigation within 30 days. In cases involving clear forgery, and this, she said, was a clear case, the debt is typically removed from the victim's name within 60 to 90 days. A pause. Once the investigation confirms fraud, the findings are referred to the appropriate authorities. That process moves forward on its own from there. Meaning, Lacey, I said. Meaning the evidence goes where it goes, Denise said carefully. Your name will be cleared. What comes after that is not your responsibility. I sat with that. I realized, exactly right. Not my responsibility. I had spent a considerable portion of my life shouldering things that were never mine to carry, and I was working slowly with uneven results to set that habit down. Thank you, Denise. One more thing, she said. The private account, the beneficiary designation. A brief pause. It was Sharon Ingram. I went very still. Not Aaron, not even a close friend. Lacey had been quietly laying a financial foundation beneath herself, and she had designated her mother as the one who would receive it if anything happened before she could reach it herself. I thought about Sharon's voice on the phone that Wednesday evening, all that warmth doing a great deal of heavy lifting. Nora is watching all of this, Douglas. All right, I said. Thank you. I drove back to the Marriott that evening and sat in the parking lot a moment before going inside. The light in room 316 was on. I had left it burning by accident that morning. Somehow, that felt right, coming back to a room that had kept the light on. People expect one confrontation to set a family right. They expect the truth to surface the room, to go still, and something to click back into place, a reckoning, then a restoration, the way it plays out in the final 20 minutes of a film. Real families don't move that way. What they get, if they're fortunate, is a starting point, a place from which the real work can begin slowly, with no promise attached to the outcome. The weeks after Nora's birthday were quiet in a way that felt earned rather than empty. Aaron called on a Tuesday evening 3 weeks after the party. He had landed a position with a logistics company in Chicago, nowhere near the regional director role he'd been pursuing, nothing close to it. An operations coordinator position, the kind of title he would have read as a retreat 5 years ago. The salary was considerably lower than what he had been earning before everything came undone. I start Monday, he said. How do you feel about it? A pause. Honest answer. Relieved, he said, which I hadn't anticipated. I turned that over after we said goodnight. The relief of a man who has been performing confidence on unstable footing for so long that the actual ground lower, plainer, humbler than what he'd imagined for himself, registers as something approaching rescue. He began selling things off, not because anyone directed him to, but because he looked at the house and the accounts and the facts of his situation and started running the numbers himself at last, without routing any portion of it through me. The outdoor grill went first, a large stainless steel thing that had been fired up maybe 4 times, then a set of speakers from the living room. Then the watch Lacey had given him 2 Christmases back that he had never much cared for but had worn because she'd picked it out. He didn't tell me any of this directly. I heard it from Larry, who had heard it from a neighbor of Aaron's who happened to be his brother-in-law's college roommate. Exactly the kind of link-by-link chain that Larry Beaumont followed with the ease of a man who had spent his whole life in Chicago and knew everyone in it by 2 degrees. He's doing the work, Larry said quietly on his own. Good, I said. We were at Steak and Shake on Shadeland Avenue again. Same booth, same Dayton Avenue traffic, moving past the glass. Same country station, low on the speakers. It was a Wednesday evening, and the place was running half empty, and Larry had ordered pie, which he always did when he sensed things were tilting the right way. How do you feel? Larry asked. I gave the question the thought it deserved. Like someone who finally stopped ignoring the check engine light. I said, Larry pointed his fork at me. That is the most mechanic thing you have ever said in your life. 30 years on a factory floor. I said, and somehow this is the first time it shows. He took a bite of pie. You gonna be all right, Douglas? Yes, I said, and I meant it in a way I hadn't been able to mean much of anything for quite some weeks. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, a text arrived from a number I nearly didn't place. It had been that long since I'd seen it appear on my screen. Lacey, what I did was wrong. I'm sorry. 9 words. No explanation behind them, no context around them, nothing trailing at the end asking for anything. Just 9 words sitting in a bubble on my phone screen while I stood at the Marriott window with my coffee going cold in my hand. I read it 4 times. I set the coffee aside, reached for the phone, and typed my reply. Thank you for saying that. Then I slipped it into my pocket and turned toward the window. Below the parking lot sat, glazed in pale winter light, the kind that shows up but doesn't bother doing anything useful. A woman bundled in a green coat worked her way through a grocery run into a minivan. A boy on a bicycle was treating each speed bump at the exit like a small, solemn engineering problem. The world just going about its business. Late that afternoon, my phone rang the contractor calling from Carmel. "Mr. Kenyon," he said, "we're finishing up this week. You can have the house back by Friday." I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, and something moved through my chest that I couldn't quite label. Happiness wasn't exactly the right word. Deeper than that, more structural. Like a door you'd given up expecting to open one that had been shut so long, you'd half forgotten the room existed suddenly swinging wide and showing you it was still yours. "Thank you, Hank," I said. "I'll be there Friday." I ended the call. I sat for a moment looking at Nancy's photo on the desk. 5 weeks in that room, and every night she'd been right there holding the same warm, faraway smile. "Nearly time, Nan," I said quietly. "Nearly time we go home." 3 weeks after I got back to Carmel, Aaron appeared on a Saturday afternoon. His truck came up the drive without me hearing it. I was out in the backyard deep into a losing battle with a 40-pound bag of garden soil I'd been hauling or trying to haul from the patio toward the flower bed along the rear fence. The whole plan had seemed perfectly sensible. Thursday night sitting at the kitchen table with something warm to drink. Out here in actual cold air with my knee barking at me, and a bag that had apparently gotten heavier since I'd wrestled it out of the car. It was a different story entirely. 4 feet. That was my progress. "Dad." I straightened. Aaron stood at the back gate, both hands in his jacket pockets, watching me, with something on his face that lived somewhere between fond amusement and quiet hurt. He carried himself better than the last time I'd laid eyes on him. Some of the hollowness had gone out of him. He no longer looked like a man kept upright purely by stubbornness. He'd shaved. His jacket was one I didn't know, nothing expensive, just something sensible and plain, not what he'd have reached for 18 months ago. "I had it under control," I said. "You did not," he said. He unlatched the gate, crossed the yard, picked up the bag like it weighed nothing, and carried it over to the bed. He set it down and stood there taking in the bare earth along the fence where sunflowers had stood last summer, the gap by the back door where Nancy's lavender had been. "You're putting her garden back," he said. "It's not quite the season for most of it, but lavender's tough, and if I get the sunflower bulbs in now, they'll come up again in the spring." He gave a slow nod. He gazed at the empty beds, and something passed through his expression that he made no effort to hide or move past. She'd have loved this," he said. "Yeah," I said. "She would have." We headed inside. I made iced tea force of habit even in November because Nancy had kept a glass of it going year-round. And somewhere back in the 90s, I'd picked up the custom and never thought to set it down. We carried our glasses out to the back porch and sat in our coats the way people in Indiana do when they're not quite ready to go back inside. But the weather has already cast its vote on the matter. Aaron cradled his glass in both hands' eyes on the empty beds. "I owe you an apology," he said at last. No "but" trailing behind it. I let the silence sit. "I turned my own shame into something I aimed at you," he said. His voice was level, but it cost him the voice of a man who'd worked out exactly what he needed to say and was committed to getting through it without softening the edges. "I was too embarrassed to admit I needed help, so I made it feel like you'd failed some duty by not reading my mind. I let Lacey treat you the way she did, because holding her accountable would have meant owning up to what was actually going on, and I wasn't capable of that." He stopped, swallowed hard. "You were the one person I knew would still be there afterward. I banked on your forgiveness and I used it as cover. That's the piece I can't let go of." The ache sitting in my chest was enormous and precise, and it wore his name. "And I appreciate you saying that." I told him no "but" on the end of it. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile exactly, the faint sketch of one. "It took some practice." "I believe that." He studied his glass. "I've gone back through everything the bank records, the statements. I found the transfers Lacey was moving into the separate account. Every single month. Even during the months he caught himself. Even during the months when I was standing here telling you we couldn't make rent." "I know," I said. "I didn't know." He looked up sharply. "I need you to understand I had no idea." "I do understand that," I said. "I could see it in your face the night I told you about the loan. That wasn't a man who knew." He dipped his chin. His jaw tightened and released. Out past the back fence, a cardinal dropped onto the far post, a hard red comma against the pale gray of the November sky, and regarded us with the absolute composure of a creature that considers every fence it lands on to be entirely its own. I forgive you, I said. Aaron lifted his eyes. I mean every word of that, I said. But there's more, and I need you to sit with it. I held his gaze steady. You won't have access to my finances again, not ever. That's not a statement about love, and access are two separate things, and I let myself muddle them for far too long. He didn't look away. His eyes had gone wet, but he kept them on mine. I know, he said barely above a murmur. I'm not going to ask. Good, I said. I got to my feet and opened my arms, and my son rose and came to me, and the two of us stood on that back porch coats on November, pressing in around us and held each other. This man I used to hoist onto my shoulders so he could see over the crowd at Little League. This man who had broken things, helped himself to things, said things that couldn't be called back. This man who was still at the bottom of everything mine. Then I stepped back. I'll stay for dinner, I said. He dragged the back of his hand across his eyes quickly in that way men manage it when they've decided they're through. What are you cooking? I haven't the faintest idea, I said. But two people can figure out a meal better than one person eating whatever he could be bothered to throw together. That pulled a real laugh out of him, short, a little unsteady but genuine. That was enough. The first morning I woke up in my own house, again I stood too long in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen. Everything read as smaller than memory had kept it. The cabinets had aged visibly. The hallway floor registered every footstep in its own editorial way. The backyard, when I looked out the window, seemed more contained than the version I'd been carrying around during 5 weeks at the Marriott Courtyard on Michigan Road. But smaller wasn't a complaint. Smaller was just the accurate version. The house was the right fit for the life I was actually in, and standing there that first morning, that was precisely what I needed it to be. By summer, the garden had found its footing. The lavender beside the back door had rooted with the quiet confidence of something that's been doing this for centuries and sees no reason to hurry. Along the fence, sunflowers rose to shoulder height, swiveling their broad faces after the morning light, with an earnest optimism I found honestly a little instructive. The tomatoes in the corner bed went well past what one person could eat, so it was jars lined up on the counter, paper bags left on neighboring porches, the kind of surplus that Nancy would have taken as a personal point of pride. Nora came every other Saturday. Every time she arrived, it was the same, the energy of someone who'd been banking it up all week just for this backpack slung over one shoulder. Some new obsession already mid-sentence before she'd cleared the door. We made pancakes. We made our way to the Carmel Clay Public Library where she held firm opinions on the graphic novel shelves. We went out to water the garden, and she narrated at length to the tomato plants, each of which she had christened, after a character from a series I hadn't read, but was accumulating a solid working knowledge of. One Saturday, she showed up with a drawing. She raised it up before her backpack had even hit the floor. A crayon picture of a man standing in a garden, tall sunflowers framing him from behind, a small figure next to him with braids that told me exactly who it was meant to be. The man in the picture was smiling. He had on a green flannel shirt. My throat did the thing it had been doing lately. Is that me? I said. Obviously, she said, in the tone of someone who has run out of patience with a very slow student. It's wonderful, I said. Better than the horse, she said. Much better than the horse. She lit up, set the backpack down in a heap, and marched straight into the kitchen to open pancake negotiations. I lingered in the doorway a moment, the drawing still in my hands before I went after her. Larry started coming by on Friday evenings in July, the way he'd fallen into doing most weeks by then. No call ahead, no particular reason given. Just the sound of his truck in the driveway and a knock I knew before I was halfway to the door. We settled on the back porch with our iced tea and watched the light turn amber behind the rooftops to the west. You look different, he said. Is how so? He took his time with it. Lighter, I sat with that. Out in the yard, the sunflowers shifted a little in the evening air. From somewhere inside drifted the low murmur of the television I'd left. Going in the living room, a nature documentary about birds I'd been half following before Larry showed up. Turns out loneliness is cheaper than humiliation, I said. Larry lifted his glass. I'll drink to that. The light drained away, and the fireflies rose up over the garden, winking on and off in the warm July dark. Two old men on a back porch in Indiana. Nothing urgent waiting on either of us, nowhere else we needed to be. Nancy's lavender was in full bloom beside the back door. And that's where this chapter of the story rests for now. Two old men on a back porch in Indiana watching the fireflies come out over a garden that was finally growing again. I won't pretend any of this came cheap. There were nights in that hotel room when I lay awake wondering where I had gone wrong as a father, as a man who thought he understood the people around him. What I came to understand slowly, the way you understand most things that matter, is that being deceived by someone you love is not the same as being foolish. I believe God allows those seasons of loss not to break us, but to clear away whatever we had leaned on instead of our own better judgment. The Lord's timing in all of it was not what I would have chosen. It was better. If you've followed along with these grandpa revenge stories or any of the father stories I've shared here, you'll know this channel isn't about bitterness. It's about what comes after. So here is what I'd pass on to anyone sitting where I once sat. Do not confuse love with access. One is something you give freely. The other has to be earned and can be taken back. When someone shows you who they are through their choices with your money, believe them. Affection does not cancel out a pattern. Keep at least one person in your life who will tell you the hard thing plainly without dressing it up. That kind of friend is worth more than he knows. And tend to something that grows, a garden, a habit, a relationship. It will do more for you than you expect. If this story moved you or made you think, leave a comment and let me know what it brought up for you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, a friend, a sibling, anyone carrying something they haven't told you about yet. And if you haven't already subscribed to Grandpa's Revenge so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.